Chuck, why can we trust the Bible?
Well, that's a big subject. There's many reasons. We stumble, in a sense, because the names are not translated. We don't translate names. My formal name, they call me Chuck, but I'm Charles. What does Charles mean? Different people have different opinions. No one knows what that means. Well, in the Hebrew, though, you can infer the meaning of the names because of the roots.
Yes.
So let's just go through a few of these, okay? Adam is pretty straightforward. That's man, right? Adamah,
right.
Man, okay. He had a son by the name of Seth. And what is so? So now we have these names, and if we read them in English, they're meaningless to us. Adam, Seth, Enosh, and so forth.
Of course.
Let's read them with the English implications of the roots, as I just said. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death, God's death, shall bring the despairing comfort or rest.
That is
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, man. And in this one, we are watching Chuck Missler give some astonishing evidence on why we can believe the Bible to be true. And man, he talks about some things that really fascinates me, blew my mind, honestly, and I wanted to watch it with you guys today on the channel, man. Before we get started, I just want to say thank you to the people who have supported the past videos. You guys have been loving these Chuck Missler videos, and so have I. So just, you know, we're going to keep watching them together. If you guys want to support the channel any further than that, go check out my merch, man, at jesusinjapan.store. Some merch that I've made to help share the gospel. But with that being said, let's hop into today's video.
Chuck, why can we trust the Bible?
Well, that's a big subject. There's many reasons. I think the first discovery, there's two discoveries in our way of thinking that will make this clear. The first discovery is that we have here 66 books that were penned by over 40 different guys over thousands of years, and yet we now discover it evidences a deliberate design from end to end. And I don't mean just in theme. We discover that every number, every letter, every place name appears to be deliberately in place by deliberate, skillful design. But the second discovery, for the first discovery is the integrity of the whole, which is startling. But the second discovery is that it has to do with its origin. See, let me back up a little bit, Sid. We all assume that time is linear and absolute. And we do that because
that's what we live in, type of situation.
And in school, the teacher wrote a line on the blackboard from left to right. The left end was the birth of somebody, the founding of an empire or whatever, and the right end was the end of that person or empire. So we tend, from that experience, to think that time is linear and absolute. From that background, when we start talking about eternity or God, we tend to imagine someone who has lots of time. We tend to think of eternity as a line that starts at infinity on the left and goes to infinity on the right. That God is simply someone who has lots of time. Well, that's poetic and it's useful in our songs and things, but it's bad physics. Because we know from Einstein's theory of relativity that time is a physical property. Time varies with mass, acceleration, or gravity. Now, is God subject to gravity? Of course not. So God is not somebody who has lots of time. God is somebody that dwells outside the restrictions of the physical world.
That'd be a great realm to dwell in.
Exactly. Well, the point is, if God has the technology to create us in the first place, he has the technology to get a message to us.
Yeah.
But how does he authenticate the message? How does he let us know that the message is really from him and not some kind of contrivance or a fraud of some kind? One way, probably there's many answers to that, and we'll talk about a few, but one of the answers is to demonstrate that the origin of his message is from outside time. That's what Isaiah means when he says it is he that inhabiteth eternity.
Okay, so how does he demonstrate this?
By writing history before it happens. He declares that he alone knows the end from the beginning. Let me use an analogy to get this across. Let's assume we're watching a major parade. We're sitting on the curb, and around the corner comes the marching units, the bands, whatever. For us, sitting at that curb, the parade is a sequence of events. But to someone who's outside the plane of that existence, say in the chopper above, they could see the beginning and the end simultaneously.
Of course.
And that's exactly the position God is.
But Chuck, a lot of skeptics say the predictions or the prophecies in the Bible are so general that of course they come true. They're not that specific. How would you respond?
No, that's not the case. I'm sorry to cut Chuck off there, guys. Please don't get mad at me, but I wanted to respond to that question myself really fast and say that I would respond to people by saying, look at some of the prophecies like Isaiah 53 that talk about Jesus before he was even, even thought about it. Before, he was a gleam in somebody's eye, as the old folks like to say. But those prophecies foretold of someone dying for our sins in a manner that Jesus did. And he made a really good point about, God being somebody who's outside of time. We view time, chronologically, in a chronological order of, when we were born and the time before and the future, that's to come. But Jesus, him coming and dying for us was something so significant. It was chaosis. I think I'm saying it right. If I said that wrong, correct me in the comments. But his coming was so important, so significant that it changed, the spectrum of time that we view it chronologically. Time went from BC BC to AD because of Christ. So, I just thought that was fascinating. Wanted to share with you. But let's continue watching.
They are shockingly, astonishingly specific.
Give me an example.
Well, the most interesting ones tend to get a little technical, but let me give you a.
That's specific that they're too technical sometimes.
Well, exactly. But let me give you a simple one.
Okay.
That people may find provocative. This is a more subtle thing, but at the same time, I think it'll be provocative, and that's the genealogy in Genesis chapter 5.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you read the book of Genesis, the first few chapters are kind of interesting. You got the creation, you got the whole incident in the garden and all of that. That's straightforward. But we get to and from chapter 6 on, you've got the flood of Noah and all of that. But chapter 5 is one of those chapters that we tend to skip over because it's a genealogy
of 10 people. It's got a lot of names, right?
Just names. And we have 10 people there from Adam. It's basically the genealogy from Adam to Noah. And when we read that in the English Bible, we stumble, in a sense, because the names are not translated. We don't translate names. My formal name, they call me Chuck, but I'm Charles. What does Charles mean? Different people have different opinions. No one knows what that means. Well, in the Hebrew, though, you can infer the meaning of the names because of the roots.
Yes.
So let's just go through a few of these, okay? Adam is pretty straightforward. That's man, right? Adamah,
right?
Man, okay. He had a son by the name of Seth. And what does Seth imply? It's a root that implies appointed. We get a clue from that from the previous chapter. When Eve gave birth to Seth, she felt he was appointed to be a replacement for Abel, whom Cain slew. The word Seth suggests appointed. When Seth has a son, his name is Enosh, which comes from Anash. It's an incurable wound or woe or grief or whatever. It means mortal, in effect. Enosh has a son by the name of Canaan. Some English Bibles have it misappropriated in Canaan. No, it's Kenan. In fact, Balaam does a pun on on the Kenites in Numbers 24. It really means sorrow. We go on. Now, those two guys probably had a belly full of these horrible names, mortal and sorrow. So when Kenan had a son, he named him Mahalalel. Mahalal is the blessed or praised one. El is the name for God.
So what you're doing, though, is, if I'm understanding you right, is you're taking the names in Genesis in order
and looking at the Hebrew roots, what they imply.
What they imply. So we have 10 names.
10 names.
And when we find out what each one of these 10 mean,
it's an exploration. Let's see what they say.
Okay.
And Mahalalel has a son by the name of Yared. And Yared has which means it's a verb. Yarad shall come down. And we have Enoch, which is an academic term, meaning commencement or teaching. Now, Enoch's perhaps one of the more interesting ones. I should back up. Most people don't realize that the flood of Noah did not come as a surprise. It was preached on for 4 generations. But what we learn about Enoch is when he was 65, something very strange happened, because from that day on, it says he walked with God, whatever that means.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Enoch apparently had a prophecy that as long as his son that was just born would live, the judgment of the flood would be withheld. So he named him after 2 Hebrew roots, Muth, which means his death, and from a derivative of the verb shalach, which shall bring. The name Methuselah actually means his death shall bring. It's suggestive of that prophecy that was given when he was born.
So we have a sentence now by those names.
It's coming. I got a couple more, and then we'll look at it. Methuselah's son was Lamech. Now, here's a root that we use in English, lament. So, it means despairing. And Lamech has a son by the name of Noah. We've all heard of Noah, but his name comes from Noah, which means comfort. In fact, Lamech tells us that. He says he tells us why he named him Noah. He says, the same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands and so on. So now we have these names, and if we read them in English, they're meaningless to us. Adam, Seth, Enosh, and so on.
Of course.
Let's read them with the English implications of the roots, as I just said. Man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death, God's death, shall bring the despairing comfort or rest.
Yo.
That is so good that, Chuck, I want you to say that one more time. Each of those 10 names, their actual meaning put together forms a sentence and says,
man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing comfort.
Now, I don't say that that is subtle.
Wow.
I say that that is a blast, you atheist.
Yeah,
we'll be right back.
Sid's right. How could you deny something like that? That's encoded in the Bible through that genealogy that he just gave of those 10 names. It's so amazing to see how God works through his word sometimes, and how he's able to spread the message of Jesus Christ so far through time, like that, because that's some 4,000 years ago. I don't even know how long ago that is, man. But with the evidence given, man, it's hard to really say that the Bible isn't something that we can't rely on, man. And when you look at Jesus, how he lived, how he walked, how he died, how he was resurrected, how his disciples preached that to the nations abroad, it just, that evidence there, is so strong, man, that you can see that Jesus was who he said he was, and who he is, So let's continue watching.
Man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death, God's death, shall bring the despairing comfort or rest.
That's absolutely amazing.
Well, there's a couple of textual issues here. First of all, you'll never convince me that a group of Jewish rabbis contrived to hide this summary of what would be called the Christian gospel in a genealogy in the Torah. No way.
Well, obviously, they're not going to hide it. But what I'd like to know is, have you ever had occasion to share that with a Jewish rabbi?
Oh, yes, we have. And in fact...
so what does the rabbi say beyond...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not the kind of thing that constitutes a proof. Mm-hmm. It's really just a discovery that points in a direction. And now there are other examples that are crisper, but a little more technical. In Daniel chapter 9, here's the key points. The Old Testament, as we would call it, was translated into Greek in 285 BC through 270 under Ptolemy Philadelphus. He's funded it. They needed a copy of the Jewish scriptures in Greek, because that's what everybody spoke in those days. So they translated it. The importance of this is that we have copies of that, and it was done in the 3rd century before Christ was born. In that document, we have, of course, the book of Daniel. Set aside who wrote under what conditions. It's there in black and white. Daniel prays, concerned for his people, is visited by Gabriel, which gives him, Daniel, a 4-verse prophecy that lays out, in effect, everything forthcoming. But what it includes, Gabriel says to Daniel, bear in mind he's in slavery in Babylon, Jerusalem is in rubble, several hundred miles to the west. He says, from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem unto the Mashiach Nagid, the Messiah, the King, will be a certain number of days. And when you work out the arithmetic from the language, it's 173,880 days. Okay. We know the date of that decree. It was Artaxerxes Longimanus in 14... Thanks to Sir Robert Anderson, head of Scotland Yard way back when, in 1894 published a book in which he went to the trouble of nailing that date down. When we count the days from there, then the problem is, when does it end? It ends when Messiah the King. Now, if you study the Gospels, you discover that Jesus, several times he tried to take and make him as a king, but he'd just slip away. He says, my hour has not yet come. Then one day he does something weird. He not only permits it, he arranges it. Tells his disciples to go to a certain place, give him a password, get a donkey. He rides the donkey, deliberately fulfilling the prophecy of Zechariah 9:9, riding the donkey in Jerusalem. When you look at those dates, it comes out to the exact day that Gabriel told Daniel in Daniel chapter 9. Now, that's, to me, absolutely breathtaking for several reasons.
All right, let me see if I get this straight now. We had a starting point.
Starting point from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem.
And then the exact number of years that it would take.
Yes, it's expressed in a strange way that gets in this text. Basically, it's 173,880 days.
Okay, and then what would happen at that point?
To the Messiah the King.
To his birth?
The only day. No, it says the Messiah the King.
So
now, all through his ministry, several times you're going to take him and make him as a king, the enthusiasm of the crowd. He slips away. Mine hour has not yet come. Then one day he deliberately allows himself to ride this donkey into Jerusalem. We call it Palm Sunday or the triumphal entry, in which, as they go, his disciples sing Psalm 118. And the Pharisees are upset because they recognize that in the context that that's happening, they're blaspheming. They're calling him the Messiah.
Sure, there's the 118th Psalm says the stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone, and we chant this at Pesach, at Passover.
And I think it's verse 26. It's blessed is the King that cometh in the King that cometh in the name of the Lord. They're saying that. The Pharisees around there are upset because they realize these guys are inadvertently blaspheming. Master, you rebuke your disciples. He says if they held their peace, the very stones would cry out. In other words, he encourages it. He, in effect, is allowing himself at that moment to be presented to Jerusalem as king. It turns out that's 173,880 days from the date of that decree to rebuild Jerusalem. It comes out, when you go through the trouble of going through the arithmetic, it comes out precisely to the very day.
Now, you're a logical man. Is there any way to explain that beyond the fact that God knew what would happen?
Exactly. I think this represents such an unequivocal demonstration that Jesus Christ really was who he claimed to be. That was when I was a teenager, when I discovered that, it was shown to me, it blew me away. And of course, obviously through the last, 40 years, been studying it even more carefully.
I have to ask you, again, have you ever shared this with a Jewish rabbi?
Oh, sure.
And what is the reaction?
We'll love to see that.
Well, it varies. Some reactions are one of staggering acceptance and getting into it, investigating further. And of course, all of these things have ways to be denied or refuted or dismissed or shined on. We've all done that. So, as they say, where you have two Jews, you've got three opinions. So there's all kinds of views. But if you take the trouble to study it carefully, the last 4 verses of Daniel 9, and the more you can get into the original Hebrew, the clearer it becomes. And you contrast that with what in Luke chapter 19, you discover a number of things. Not only does it predict the exact day, you discover, if you look carefully at Luke 19, that Jesus held them accountable to know that day. And it's that point that he predicts the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, that not one stone would be left upon another and all that. And the passage in Daniel also describes that after this, the Messiah will be cut off, executed. The Old Testament actually presents that the Messiah will be killed. And indeed he was, of course, on the cross. And so you and I are beneficiaries of love story. Written in blood on the wooden cross.
The thing that's so amazing to me, Chuck, is that you share this with a Jewish rabbi who knows the Hebrew so well. And even though it is so specific, rabbis are instructed not to think for themselves, to go on the thinking of the ancient rabbis. But I'm saying to rabbis, I'm saying to Jewish people, I'm saying to non-Jewish people, to Muslims, respect your heritage. But think for yourself, because it's your life. It's your life that's at stake. It's your purpose. It's your destiny. And consider this a divine appointment with God.
Right.
As to why.
Right. Hey, Sid, you're cooking it up there at the end, man. But to add on to what Sid was saying there, guys, man, it's not just your life, it's your life after here that's at stake. You got to really examine the evidence. So with something that important at stake, I would ask you to examine the evidence of the Bible, examine the evidence of Jesus Christ, the eyewitness testimonies that were given by the disciples, examine the prophecies like Mr. Missler was saying, that foretold the coming of Christ, even something as major as those genealogies leading to Christ. It's something powerful. That's something that's intangible. That's there. That's evidence for for Christ being who he said he was, and who he is, which is the living word. He is God on the throne. But with that being said, guys, definitely check out the video in its entirety. Link for it in the description. Definitely go give the church that Chuck Missler founded a subscribe on their YouTube channel, guys. I believe it's pronounced Koinonia House. Man, if I said that wrong, please don't please don't get mad at me. With that being said, guys, appreciate you guys watching the video. If you would like to, support the channel any further than that, go get you some merch over at JesusandJapan.store. Use code Holy Spirit at checkout for 20% off, guys. With that being said, see you in the next video, and God bless.